behind what they're saying. Very, very valid points. All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to our latest Sterling Leadership Series. It is designed to help organizations adopt role model behaviors and drive high-performing results. My name is Laura McNeil. I am a 20-year Sterling Master Examiner, former Examination Board Chair, and I am a director at Citigroup in the Technology Department. During this particular series, we will be providing an overview of the process categories that comprise the Sterling Leadership Model. And for those that were with us during the Core Values and the Organizational Profile Leadership Series, this particular series is designed to bridge the gap by focusing on organizational planning and execution. Core Values, Organizational Profile kind of set the stage as Major General John Harris spoke to, set the stage for creating the culture that we want to thrive within. Now we'll focus a little more deeply on organizational planning and execution. Also, during the series, we are providing a link to the Sterling resource book in the chat window, so keep an eye out for that. It is a free download. The resource book isn't essential for anyone who wants to learn more or actually apply the criteria in your own team or at your own organization. It does go into detail about the framework of Sterling, the Sterling model, and the components and how the components are integrated within the model. And just a couple more reminders before we do get started. The presentation from today will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in approximately 24 hours. The link to the YouTube channel is accessible from the sterlingcouncil.org site. During the presentation, feel free by all means to submit any questions you may have in the chat window, and we will be pulling the questions in for a Q&A session after the speaker wraps up. And I will also, before we open the Q&A, provide my summary points from the presentation today to all of you, and we'll gather those points together and provide them in summation at the end of our series. So today's series, today's session of our new series actually features Sterling Master Examiner and Board Member Roland J. Martinez, Deputy Director of Florida Department of Health in Broward County. Roland is also our chairman of the Sterling board this year, and one person who I'd like to call my friend. So Roland, do you want to go ahead and take it away and impart your words of wisdom on us?
Absolutely. You know, Laura, I think you're my friend too. So I think that's great. And I agree with you that you know, listening to the general talk about culture and all of those things that are so important to an organization and what leaders really the work of what leaders do. I think you can listen to that video. I'm sure you can listen to that video a number of different times and get something really, really different out of it. So yeah, I agree 100%. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our next series. As Laura so well put it, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be talking about the core of the criteria, which is the process categories, and how you can utilize them and what are the processes associated inside of them to be able to do what you need to do to be able to get your organizations to a level that you want to get them to begin the performance excellence journey. For some of you to continue the performance excellence journey for others. And so with that, I want to start out with a little bit of a story, right? So there's this great book out there by Simon Sinek called, you should start with why. And I wanted to start this out today with why. And so 14 years ago, here at this health department, we started our Sterling journey. And the organization was a very different organization than it is today. It struggled with accountability. It had siloing throughout the entire organization. Performance wasn't the focus of the organization. It was quite frankly something else. And so we found when we came into the organization, this administration, when we came into the organization, we found that what we wanted to do was, as the general put it so well, change the culture of the organization. And we needed a framework in order to be able to do that. And so what we utilized was the Sterling model. What we used was the criteria for performance excellence to be able to provide a framework for us to be able to define excellence for ourselves. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit today, a little more, but that's the core of it. That was the why we did this. And so there's so many people that are out there that always ask when we're either at conference or in these sessions that ask, why do you want to do this? It's a lot of work. And the truth of the matter is that you really have to find your why. If you're satisfied with what you're doing in your organization today, if everything's going the way that you want it to go, if you're achieving all of the goals that you want to achieve, then, maybe this isn't for you. But I find that the only thing that can improve are dead things. And so if your organization is a living, breathing organism, the changes that it has to go on, that go on every single day, you have to do with regards to your competitors, with regards to providing your customers with new and exciting products and services, to be able to create the climate and the culture for your employees, then this is where it's at. And to use it is going to take you on a journey that's going to give you that satisfaction of achieving those particular goals. And so in my experience, some of the things that have happened because of the criteria, or at least what we've done here, we've been able to take the organization from what I explained, which was an organization that wasn't really accountable, to one of the most recognized health departments in the United States, to be able to take the organization and be able to pivot on a moment's notice, whether that's during an outbreak or a pandemic that we've experienced over the last 3 years, and be able to provide folks, our customer groups, their vaccinations, and be able to put pods up and be able to do that at the speed at which we need to be able to offset the diseases that are coming at us. And we're only able to do that because we practice this every single day. It isn't something that we just do, separate and apart from our daily work. It's incorporated into everything that we do. And we do it all the time. Now we're on to monkeypox. And we're able to pivot the organization because we have that agility, because of the criteria to be able to do that. So I would challenge all of you to find your why. For us, it's to be able to serve our community. It's to be able to provide those services for them, to be able the best that we can possibly be so that we can protect our community. And we use the criteria to be able to do that. And so a lot of folks, when they start out, right, because they don't know where to begin. And so that's a hard place to start. It's a hard place to find. And so a lot of folks just go to books. They go read somewhere. And, the New York Times bestseller list is always a great place to go. But there's a trap there. You can, all these books that are listed here, Good to Great, Leaders Eat Last, Begin with Why, the list goes on. And they're great books. They're great books to find approaches. They're great books to find best practices. But none of them provide a framework for you to be able to do what it is that you want to do, to be able to run your organization. And so you can get an approach out of it. You can say, okay, well, we're going to do this particular, we're going to get the flywheel going, like Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, but it doesn't give you a framework to be able to run the organization, to be able to do the things that you want to do. And so management by bestseller, it's a good idea, but, and you can get ideas from it, but it's not going to give you what you need to be able to do that. What is going to give you what you need to be able to do that is this. Right, is the criteria itself. And that has a whole bunch of stuff on the screen. The criteria itself, for those of you who aren't really familiar with it, are obviously, consist of 7 categories that give you that framework, okay? What we're going to be discussing over the next 6 weeks are the 6 process categories, right? Because there are 6 process categories inside of the criteria and 1 results category. And so we're going to focus on the how we do things in our system, in our organization. And so those are the ones that we're going to really focus on, right? So the thing about the criteria is that it's an integrated framework, right? It takes both strategy and execution and it puts them together to give you that framework, okay? So a great Harvard Business Review article came out, I guess it was about 2017, that talked about the differences. You have two kinds of real leaders in the world, right? You got the visionary leaders who look and see things and see how things have to be done, and they're real great at putting together strategy. And then you have the operators in the world, the people that go and make things happen. So you got strategy and you got execution, right? There's only about 8% of the leaders in this poll that they did. There's only about 8% of the leaders out there that can actually do both. That can actually be visionary and then operationalize what it is that they want to do. And so the criteria brings us closer to being able to do that. You know, we talked about at the beginning of the last series, we talked about the organizational profile and really talked about what was important to you, right? And be able to list out the things that were important to you. And now we're talking about how do you make those things happen? How do you make those things come to fruition? And so the criteria here on the left side of the screen, you know, we've got leadership and strategy and customers and workforce and operations and results. Okay. And we've got measurement, analysis, and knowledge management. Okay. So this first piece of the puzzle with leadership, you know, leaders really drive the strategy of the organization, and they really engage, just engage how we deal with our customer groups. And so we call that the leadership triad. That's over on the side. And then we have the results triad on the other side, right on the other side of the screen. And what we have is how does the workforce and the operations drive the results that we want to achieve? And all of that's on a foundation of measurement, analysis, and knowledge management and the core values. All they're doing is taking all the stuff that we talk about in the organizational profile, all the things that we say that are important to us, and make them a reality, put processes around them so we can assure that we're achieving them. And so I thought about this for this presentation, and I looked at a couple different things. And when I started to think about the criteria, I started thinking about light. This is what this picture is on the side, and this prism and how it gets separated. And so your organization is like this big monolith, right? It's this big thing that's composed of all these different parts. And sometimes it's really hard to see the parts individually because they're designed to all work together, and they're designed to spill one process into the other. And that's a good thing. The criteria, what it does for you, these seven categories, what they're able to do for you is what the prism does for light. Is what it does is it takes that organization and it allows you to separate out into its different components so you can see more clearly how they interact, who's using them, the whole ball of wax, so that you can tweak where you need to tweak and fix where you need to fix in order to make happen what you need to make happen. So we all know that the criteria is pretty complicated. For those of us who've been around the criteria, and if you've ever opened it up, you know that it's not really written in English. It has terminology associated with it that's sometimes hard to grasp. And so I thought about this, and I started to think about what the fundamental questions were that the criteria were asking. And I came up with this. So if the organizational profile, if you remember going back to that, is really concerned with that question, what is important to you, then the criteria itself, these 6 categories that we're going to be talking about, is really about how do you lead your organization, right? In leadership, that's the fundamental question. How do you lead your organization? How do you plan for the future? How do you create lasting customer relationships, right? It's not just about having customers and giving them something, immediate that they need, giving them the pizza that they want. But how do you create those lasting customer relationships where they not only come back to you, but bring others with them? How do you analyze and provide information, gather, analyze, and provide information? How do you do that? How do you manage people? How do you develop people in your organization? How do you design your work products and services? And then finally, how do you know whether you've achieved all those things that above? You designed them, you created them to create these outcomes, but how do you know that you've actually done it? And so the fundamental question of the criteria is really, how do you? And if you ask that question over and over and over again, you'll get to where you need to be. And so the other piece of the puzzle here, right? You got a picture of a puzzle up there. The other piece of the puzzle here is evaluation. So you can put together approaches. You can put together things in your organization to be able to achieve strategic planning cycles. You can put in, workforce development, training programs. You can put all those things together. But how do you know that all of those things are working together as an integrated whole? How do you know whether they're working to achieve what it is that you want to achieve? And so one of the things that we use as examiners is this concept of approach, deployment, learning, and integration, right? It's how we evaluate process. So when we come look at you, we look at whether or not you have an approach, right? What's your process? Is it any good? What's your approach? So, this picture of people putting together a puzzle, there's you throw it out with a bunch of friends. Everybody's kind of doing it different. And what you want to do is you want to accomplish putting the puzzle together so it finally shows that final picture, right? And so there's different strategies associated for that. Maybe you put all the colors that are the same together. Maybe you're the kind of person that builds the outside edge first, so that you have the context in which to build the rest of the puzzle. There are a number of different approaches, but what is it? What is the approach that you're using? Do you have one? Okay, or are you just doing stuff? All right. Deployment. Where is it? Where is it used, and who uses it? Right. So the best example here is really McDonald's, right? The McDonald's brothers created a service system way back in the day to be able to put out their hamburgers as quickly as they possibly could and provide the best quality service that they could, right? Standardization and consistency. They made sure that in all of their system across the McDonald's system, they had that manufacturing system in place. And there's all kinds of examples of that with regards to deployment. Who's using it? Where is it used? Is it being used consistently? That's the deployment. So when you start looking at your approaches, is it deployed to the right people? Are the right people using it? Is everyone using it consistently? Learning. How have you improved it? How have you made it better? How have you learned from it? How have you provided a better widget for what it is, or a better process to create that widget? So that picture over on the side, we begin with just trying to push a square, and we end up with a wheelbarrow in the end that's pushing all the rounds. Successive, continuous improvement across the board. So how have you done that? What have you learned from those systems? And then integration, right? Whether or not it's the whole, those pieces of the puzzle are working together to create a cohesive whole. It's like painting a picture and using multiple colors to paint, the Mona Lisa. At the end, you're going to have it. You're going to have this portrait of what it is with all of these things, all the different colors, all the different processes in the organization, with the right people using them and improving them over time to be able to create the portrait that is your organization. And so I'd leave you with this. What's your why? I would challenge you to do that. What's your why? Are you satisfied with where you are today? Great. If you're not, why? And if you're looking for a good system to use, it's ours. It's the criteria for performance excellence. Bestsellers are great for approaches, but they're not systems. Okay, so don't try to avoid managing by bestseller. It tends to confuse the organization and doesn't provide it a consistent foothold on what it needs to do. You've got 7 basic questions for organizational development. I gave you those. You've got those 7 questions. Just think about those before you delve into the criteria over the next couple of weeks. Ask yourself, when we go into leadership next week, ask yourself, how do I lead the organization? How do I create lasting customer relationships? Those are the questions to ask. The process categories are concerned with how you do things, okay? So how do you do this? Step 1, step 2, step 3. That's the most important piece. And so when you're writing an application or you're implementing these things in the organization, the process is important. Everything's process, okay? With our system, no process, no points, okay? So if you can't have if you don't have a discernible process and a discernible approach, then it's kind of hard to have the deployment and learning and integration that you need to be able to make a mature system. And then you want to be able to provide you're providing the evidence for the context that you got in the organizational profile. Okay. And so you wrote the things that were important. Now you're providing the evidence that it is important. And this is what we're doing about it. Adley, what I talked about with approach, deployment, learning, and integration is really about process maturity. How well along is the process? How is it developed over time? Does it continue to answer the changing environments that we're all exposed to on a regular basis? And then finally, probably the most important thing here, right? Because all of us do some of the things that are contained in the criteria. None of us do all of them, okay? The excellence of your organization is defined by you. The criteria doesn't define that. It's not prescriptive. There's so many prescriptive systems out there that tell you to do A, B, and C. And the truth is that we know our organizations better than anybody can dictate to us how it's done. And the criteria allows us to do that. So define the excellence for yourselves. define using the criteria, define that the criteria is not prescriptive at all. And so with that, I'm pretty much done. So I'll take any questions and turn it back over to Laura.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Roland. Hey, would you mind before you take your slides down?
Yeah, it already did. See that? Look at that. Quick, fast, and in a hurry. There you go.
Awesome. Can you go back to the slide that has a Sterling model on it? I just want to call one thing out, and then I have
Sterling what? The model, right?
The model.
That
yes.
one. Sure.
Yep. Slide 2 or 3.
Yeah, this is it, right?
No, that's the book. We're looking at the book. Yes, there it is. Okay,
there
way
you
up
go.
delay.
It's latency.
Yeah, I mean, great presentation on this model is the only model that I'm aware of, and I've taught at a number of different universities here in Florida. But it's the only leadership model I know that you can use as a new leader to really figure out what you should focus on as a leader. Being a leader is a lot different than even being a manager or an individual contributor. Being a leader requires some visionary considerations and a whole different repertoire of different focal points. So I really highly recommend that if you happen to be a new leader and you're looking for some great guidance, download the resource book that we're providing you a free link to with the series. And I'm envisioning we'll be providing that link throughout the series, so you'll have multiple opportunities to download it. But I do want to point out one thing. Roland, you did an amazing job. I loved your Find Your Why and the focus on the bestsellers. Really great look at how to really focus on system and what's important to an organization. There are 6 different process categories. There's leadership, there's strategic planning, there's strategic execution, there's customers, there's workforce, there's data and knowledge management, process, and results results is a separate category on its own. We won't cover that with the process. But, over the course of the next 6 to 7 weeks, we will be delving into each one of these 6 process categories, and they are listed there on the chart. Results will be its own focal point and addressed at a future point in time. So let me go over the summary notes that I took from your presentation, Roland, and feel free to chime in because I did capture most of these while you were talking. So the very first point, find your why. I love that. And then fact, you threw out a fact there. Leaders do struggle with ensuring their organizations are efficiently and effectively executing against their strategic objectives. Also, that leaders need to be able to pivot their organizations when industry changes occur. Both of these, the Sterling framework does support the development of this skill set, this capability on how to do that. You also focus on there are many great bestsellers out there that are worthy of reading, but they reflect best practices as points in time. They are approaches and they're not typically systems. So in contrast, Sterling provides a leadership framework that evolves as industry and competitive landscapes evolve. Sterling framework also integrates visionary planning with successful execution methods. The Sterling criteria provides leaders with a framework for structuring their organizations. And the Sterling criteria can help leaders successfully execute against and deliver strategic objectives. Did I get everything? Anything incorrectly? I think everything was.
No, those are all good. That's a good summary.
Summary? All right.
Yeah. So the only thing that I would add there, I mean, it's just to augment something that you said earlier. The criteria for performance excellence is not just something that really exists in the United States. There are 47 other countries that use the criteria for performance excellence as the basis for their system in their country, right? For the basis of performance excellence as the litmus test, as the standard for business. And even in this country, I mean, the Baldrige criteria for performance excellence is managed by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. I mean, these folks are the folks that decide, they're the ones that define that a gallon is a gallon, a foot is a foot, and a mile is a mile. Okay, so they set the standard for measurement in the United States for those objective things. And so they're the guardians of this criteria, which is the standard for business excellence in the United States. And so if you're not thinking about that, it's a really important kind of concept. I challenge anyone to find a better system that they can utilize in their organization. I've never found one. I've been using the criteria for 22 years across multiple organizations. I've never found anything better.
Absolutely. Neither have I. Closed system. The beauty of the Sterling framework is that it doesn't allow for things to get lost. If you execute the framework appropriately, as Roland said, every organization may be different in how they execute against it. It's just a framework. But if you execute it correctly, the model actually does ensure that things don't get lost, that everything stays within the system and it's a closed system. And it really, in my mind, inculcates this culture of continuous learning, continuous improvement, and like a deep desire for feedback and progress. So we do have one question here, Roland.
Okay.
Kevin Maloney, our very own Kevin Maloney, is asking if innovation was removed from ADLI.
Innovation isn't really removed from ADLI. Innovation really, when you talk about integration and innovation, you're talking about the same kind of thing. It still exists inside of the criteria, but we keep it strictly to this ADLI concept. It hasn't gone away. Innovation is still an important component of whether or not you do things, and that's kind of nested inside of the learning component as well, right? So as you improve things, you come up with better ways of doing it. You come up with better ways and novel ways of solving the problems that you have to solve. And so that learning component really kind of takes care of that. Any kind of innovation that you have obviously has to be integrated into the organization, but it's the learning component more than any of the other four that really start to look at innovation. So that makes sense?
Yeah. Makes sense to me. Absolutely. Actually, innovation to me is like the core of what the framework is focused on, right? It's continuous learning, continuous evolution, continuously innovating, improving. Yes. Okay, how about another one? How is ADLI actually represented in the process categories? I know you had a whole slide on ADLI, but when we look at ADLI, as a process category framework, how would you say that it's represented?
Wow, that's a good one, Laura. All right, so obviously approach is represented in all of the process categories, with the exception of results, right? Because results is a totally separate kind of thing. But in the 6 process categories, approach is everything. Every question is really kind of framed as a how question, and every how question is a process. It's how it steps up. But it's also going to ask you things like, in leadership, it asks you how you communicate, right? And asks you who you communicate with. So that communication system inside of leadership that you may identify, the deployment of that, who uses it, who are using it with, how is it used, is in deployment, right? And the criteria used to ask for how you kept current. Now it's more implied in the criteria with how the learning cycles, how they're improved over time. And integration's always implied. I mean, you can't have communication, right? So you've got to communicate to a set of employees what's important in the organization. One of the tools that you may utilize is the strategic plan to be able to communicate what's important to the organization. And so you link from what's your leadership system, your strategic plan becomes a component of that communication, and then you're applying the resources in that strategic plan for your employees to be able to achieve the things that you need to achieve. And so ADLI's kind of built in there as a whole with each question that the criteria asks. Some questions become a little more explicit with regards to that, but just keep focused on the fundamental questions that are the basic requirements of the criteria. If you stay inside of those, it'll really help. It'll really help with the journey.
Well, very good. So we have a minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much, Roland, for your time today and your insightful thoughts and great presentation. And thank you all for joining us today. Hope you can join us. Next week's session is on Tuesday, September 6th at noon. We will have Nicole Solomon, who is the Regional Program Manager with Florida's Department of Children and Families. She is also an adjunct professor at USF, and if that's not enough, she's a Sterling Master Examiner, and she is the head and has been the head of the leadership committee for the Sterling Examination Board for a few years. She'll be with us next week to present Sterling's leadership process, which is the leadership category and the first category in the model. So once again, thanks so much for joining us today. And I wish each and every one of you a very, very happy week ahead and a very nice Labor Day weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you, Roland.
You're welcome. Bye, gang.